Welcome to Leadership Coaching, the podcast, which builds on conventional wisdom and adds a fresh perspective on this ever-evolving field of coaching. Have we been misunderstanding leadership all along? Traditionally, we ascribe leadership to certain people, but what if leadership lives in relationships instead? If you've been struggling with your identity as a leader, it may be that limitations of an old model just don't fit. Join leadership coach Dr. Martin Kettlehut and results coach and certified IFS practitioner Bill Tierney as we discuss the nuances of leadership as relation. The Leadership Coaching Podcast, awakening the confident and compassionate leader within.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Coaching Podcast with Dr. Martin Kettlehut, known to me as Marty, known to others as Doc. Welcome, Marty. Good to see you. And I'm Bill Tierney. I'm a results coach and a certified IFS practitioner. And today, our topic is self-care. And the reason that we're talking about self-care today is because recently, in a group that I had last week, during the check-in period, which the participants only get a minute apiece. So in that minute, they really boiled everything down to what do I really want to have heard? What do I want to say? And there were 7 participants in that particular group. So almost everybody was there. And I think 6 of those people said something that indicated to me they were struggling with self-care. They felt overwhelmed. They were fatigued. They weren't getting enough sleep. They were stressed out, these kinds of things.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So after they each had done their check-in, I said, I'm hearing a common theme, self-care. And I'm looking back on the Zoom screen at my group participants, and they're all going, yes.
You got it.
Let's talk about that.
Good listening.
Yeah. So then that's why I proposed it to you. And you and I have, we've talked a little bit about this before we hit record, because we want to manage the time during this episode well. And so what we've decided is that for the first 20 minutes or so, I'd like to hear from you about your ideas around self-care, because you've written about it extensively in your book.
Mm-hmm.
So
both of my books, actually.
Both your books. Okay. So I want to just kind of hand it off to you, and just know that I'm going to probably jump in and interrupt you and ask questions.
Perfect. Yeah. And then we'll go to you've got some 5 good questions for us around this that I think will be very useful to the listener.
Great.
So I would begin by acknowledging that there are different levels or aspects of self to take care of. And so, I think one of the first things that I would imagine, the average listener hears is, oh, self-care, you mean like getting a pedicure and a massage, right? Like that's what, take a self-care day off of work, right? And go do something nice for yourself, which is great. That is part of self-care for sure. Nothing to belittle about that. But we're complex beings. We not only have, nails to take care of, we have a very powerful tool in our head to take care of as well. So taking care of the brain, by doing mindfulness exercises, for example, or seeing a therapist, getting the healing that we need psychologically, mentally, and also like things like playing Sudoku or Sudoku. I forget which way it goes.
I think you ever get it right.
Right. That's I remember my mom would do the crossword puzzle every Sunday, the hardest one in the Chicago Tribune, which, by the way, is not on the East Coast. That was taking care of herself, her brain, right? She didn't want to, neglect it. But if you really want to do a top-down approach, then what you're going to take care of the self is going to be being who and what you were meant to be in this life, living your purpose. And if you're doing that, then in the same way that this elm tree that I'm looking at here is doing a perfect job of living its purpose, right? it's showing us the way. It's leading, right? In that by being its purpose. And when you are taking care of yourself by living your purpose, being who you were meant to be in this life, you are leading us all, because that in at many levels inspires us, not just because we look at it and go, oh, that's the right way to be, but energetically and pragmatically, we fit into that. Like, it makes sense. You're being the what nature meant for you to be, and so we all get led in the right direction when that happens. So I think that
Can I just jump in and pause for just? I want to share a thought before I lose it.
sure.
So I'm just thinking in terms of all the different businesses that I've been in. And I've been in a lot of different businesses. The grocery business, I was in management in the grocery business. I was in property and casualty insurance. I sold cars. I was a real estate agent for a blink. I was a mortgage loan officer. And of course, now I've been a coach since 2011. And in all of those experiences, one thing there was in common was that there was special training. Some of it was required for licensing. Some of it was recommended by the employer. Some of it was required by the employer. And each of those trainings would address whatever it was that we needed to know and understand to be able to better do the job that I was attempting to do.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm listening to you, you're talking about living your purpose. Well, a lot of the trainings that I attended were around the idea of, for example, what is your why, and what is your purpose, and how do you live your purpose, and how can you inject your values into that purpose. All of that, while it's important and valuable and was interesting and helpful, is not the elm tree who is not at least in the least bit concerned about a mission statement. Or telling anybody these are my purpose. This is my purpose. These are my values. We look at the tree and we know what its purpose is. And you mentioned earlier the birds. The birds are living their purpose. They're not announcing it. They're not describing it. They're not trying to live into it. They're actually living it. So just some thoughts that were crossing my mind as you shared. Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to expand.
No, that's great, because I mean, this just goes to show, like, if you've got a mission statement or a purpose statement that isn't just like the elm trees or the birds, it's just how there is to be, then it's probably not authentic. It's probably not actually, it's contrived in some way.
It's got a should in there. Maybe it's built on the foundation of should. This is who I should be. This is what my purpose should be. And again, I really don't want to discount any of these trainings. They were amazing. They really did help me to explore and examine what's important to me, what's valuable to me. If I were actually living a life that was driven by what is important and valuable to me, how would it look different than this life that I'm living now?
Mm-hmm.
And what's the gap there? These are really important conversations, because I've been pretty lost in my life, really lost, and so far off center. So this gets back to your point about that there are all these different levels, dimensions of self that need to be cared for.
Right.
And what I'm referring to right now is my true authentic self. I didn't even know who I was, let alone know how to take care of myself. So.
Exactly. And the method, one of the methods that I use in my coaching and in my book, you can follow it yourself. It's in part 4 of the workbook for discovering what is my purpose authentically, not as a should. It starts with looking, well, what's valuable, what is important, what to me, and that's the first step to finding your purpose. And there are a few more steps to derive it from that, but that's going to tell you how you authentically want to and can live. And when you're doing that, because it fits, like there's a ka-ching that happens,
Mm-hmm.
that you can tell people who are living their purpose, they're lit up, right? They're content, and they're powerful, and it's catchy. I mean, it's you want to be like that too, and one naturally starts living one's own purpose when you're around somebody like that.
They're driven, they're inspired, they're motivated, they're focused, they've got momentum. These are all aspects of living purpose. And I also want to just throw in,
Even from within, I would want to specify, as opposed to, somebody who's a grinder, who's not driven from within. It's from, somewhere else that drive comes from.
well, even that though, maybe this is too fine a distinction, but I want to make it anyhow, is that if you're driven from within, you may be driven from parts of yourself that have been informed by and conditioned by external pressures. I have to be like dad. I have to not be like dad.
So that's not what I mean by from within then.
Well, it is. I know that that's not what you mean, but I do want to draw that as distinction, because that comes from within. These parts are within me, and they're in charge when my true authentic self is not. And so maybe we want to involve this too, like good, proper self-care from the level of true authentic self would recognize that what's driving life might be a part of me that's still tethered to and stuck in the past. And so there's that to notice. And good self-care would be, you mentioned it earlier, possibly going to therapy, doing whatever's necessary to realign to true authentic self, so that internal impetus is not grinding. It is almost impossible to stop.
It's free. Yeah, it's just doing what it's meant to do. Exactly. It's
Right.
life just flows, and there's peace, contentment, and power and effectiveness all at once.
Yes. Easy and without effort.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like the elm tree, we
That's
become like. That's why we want to use an analogy to something in nature, because that's when we're living our purpose, is when we're doing what is natural as opposed to some contrivance.
There's an alignment that happens. Just before we hit record, you were telling me about what you do at the end of the day. Would you mind telling that story in for our listeners to hear?
I might have even mentioned this before in one of our episodes. I just have a personal ritual every night before bed. I go outside, even if it's freezing out, or raining, and I let my thoughts go, up into it's great if the stars are out, because then I can sort of imagine where they're going. But sometimes it's cloudy, and I just let it all go, so that I don't bring all that stuff to bed with me. And what has started to happen is there are a couple of rabbits that live in the neighborhood that they're there at that spot where I normally stand. They are there now every night. And I thought, well, I'm going to, get out of their way and not disturb them, let them do their thing. So I moved to a different spot, but they followed me. They seem to want to be around me when I'm thoughtless, right? When I'm out of my mind, and in just in the natural peace of the evening. And it's just delightful. It's consistent now. Every night they're there.
That's amazing. It reminds me of that old song. Was it Joni Mitchell that sang it? Somebody in that era that sang it. Why do birds suddenly appear?
Exactly, yeah. Right.
And there's something that happens in the field, in the energetic field that we live and breathe in, that changes how living things around us react to us. Whether it's walking into a grocery store and greeting someone with authentic joy, and watching them perk up, and vice versa. I mean, I'll be having an off day, or I'm preoccupied with my thinking about a project. I'll walk into Home Depot, and one of the employees there will say something in such a way where I recognize that really their energy is connecting to mine and lifting me up. It can go the other way around, of course, as well. So, yeah, self-care. So this phrase, which is what we're calling this episode, self-care is leadership. Can I ask you to talk about that some more? I know you've already been talking about it, but address that directly, please.
Yeah, well, another analogy just came to mind. If you've ever sung in a choir or played in an orchestra or a rock band for that matter, I'm sorry, my association with all these old classical ways of doing things, but it doesn't matter. If you're in a musical ensemble and you're playing your part well, the way it's meant to be played, right? Then everybody knows where the beat is. They know what the harmonies are supposed to be. You're doing it. And so everybody then clicks into the ensemble and things work. And so similarly, when you're living your purpose, like when you're playing your part right, that's a problematic word. But you know what I mean? When you're being your purpose, when you're living,
When you're aligned to your purpose,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
When you are
When you are your purpose,
right?
yes. Mm-hmm.
Who you're meant to be in this life naturally, right? I don't mean meant to be because your dad said so, or meant to be because the governor said so. I mean naturally. Then you're leading, because now you where you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be, and so we can be how we're supposed to be. There's no agenda to get over, no psychological babble to deal with. It's just like puzzle pieces fitting together.
I was telling you about, that's beautiful, and it reminds me of what I was just listening to this morning. As I was in my truck, I plugged in the book I've been listening to, and it's Shift by Derek Depry, who we're going to have on the podcast here in a couple of weeks. And he is a motivational speaker, trainer, and coach. And as I'm listening to his book, I hope I don't lose it now. This is in reference to something that you were just not. Oh, he's the one that has all these great questions about that will help shift someone from a place that I'll use my words, disempowerment to empowerment, by just having them explore and examine, where is your power, where isn't it, and are you using the power that you actually have? I'm gonna stop there because I've actually lost the thread of what I wanted to say to you, and I think the reason I lost it is because I'm thinking about having Derek on the podcast, and I don't want to give away too much before he shows up.
Okay, that's cool. But yeah, I mean, that transformation question, like that, there are things, just to put a cap on this part of the conversation. I think that if I'm picking up on the gist of where you're going with the Depre citation to shift, when we are transformed and healed and are just able to be our natural selves, right? That is leadership, not in the conventional sense that we think about it, but in the natural sense. And now others are also free to be themselves. They don't have to deal with somebody who's inauthentic and out of character, and right. They can ease into, oh, you're being you, I can be me.
Well, or someone that's having a bad day. I gave the Home Depot example. It can go the other way as well. And in fact, it was. My wife and I were at the grocery store the other day, and we like to go through the self-checkout because at this particular grocery store, there is always a long, long line. They have just exactly the number of check stands open to make you wait at least 20 minutes before you can get checked out, except unless you go through self-checkout, self-care checkout. And, they've got a sign that says something like, please limit your purchases to no more than 18 or so items. Well, we fudge on that. And so we were in the check stand, and I punched in the number for the wrong produce item. So they had to call somebody over to help. And when that somebody came over to help, they saw how many items that we had, which was probably double of what we should have had. And she scolded us.
Ooh.
And neither my wife nor I said anything wisely, because if either one of us had said anything at all, it
Yeah.
would have been probably
Yeah.
like a counterpunch, because that's what it felt like. It felt like we'd just been reprimanded and scolded and shamed, the
Mm.
way that she said it, and her whole attitude. And both our energies went way down. Of course, the way we brought them back up again is, as we're in the parking lot and we're walking out to the truck, we start just saying all the things that we really wanted to say out loud to each other. We're laughing by the time we get to the truck. I'm really glad that we didn't respond. Here, I'm going to go back to Derek again. So in the book, what I was listening to this morning, he tells about he wanted so badly to be a head coach on a basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happened was, when he was one of the assistant coaches, the head coach during a practice said something to him that was so shaming and derogatory that it kicked him out of his purpose, out of his alignment.
Yeah.
It really had him hurt. It hurt him. It really had him question himself. So I'll just say that much about that part of the book as another example of, we lead. Sometimes there's poor leadership, and sometimes there's great leadership. If we're practicing good self-care at all the levels that we can, healing, education, physical, brain, mental, all of it, everything, spiritual, then we're going to be good leaders in the world. And I think that's essentially what you're saying, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's an importantly different thing to say about leadership and self-care than I've heard.
Well, yeah, it is. Well, that's
Right?
kind of why we're doing this podcast, is because we want to have a slightly, if not big difference in the message that we give about leadership.
Mhm. Yeah. So there's nothing like different or separate to do to be a leader. If you're being who you're meant to be, you're leading.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like, even I don't want to take us too far afield, but it's the funniest things have been happening to me today or recently. This morning, I was after working out, I was getting dressed in the locker room, and this little guy, he's quite small, but
That's pretty little.
he's small, but he cleans. He cleans the whole rec center. Like, I don't see anybody else doing it,
Mhm.
and he does a great job. And he's there probably from 4 in the morning till midnight every day. And he comes by, and he's just like whistling and happy and everything. And I said hello and happy Thanksgiving. He said, "You know what the secret to living a great life is?" I'm like, "Whoa, okay, what?" He said, "Acceptance. Accept the way you are and the way you're meant to be. And it's, you stop trying," he's telling me, "to make more money. Stop trying to cram more experiences into life. It's about being who you're meant to be." And I was like, wow, this is quite a sermonette. Thank you. Right. But there it was, the same lesson in a different.
Beautiful. Wow. All right. Shall we shift?
Sure.
All right. We can take about another maybe 15 to 20 minutes here. These are some questions that apparently the muse was there during this coaching group session that I told you about, where everybody agreed that self-care is what we needed to be talking about.
Yeah.
This will often happen. I've learned and been trained as a coach that rather than analyzing somebody and telling them about themselves based on my opinion and my theory about them, which is never helpful as far as I'm concerned, in my opinion, rather than doing that, help the client to discover for themselves what's true about them. And the best way to do that is to ask questions.
Yeah.
And so these questions came to me. And I also have an organizational part of me that knows how to manage around asking the questions, and then in a group of 7 or 8 people, how do you collect the answers, and how do you let the people that are considering the questions process the answers. So I thought for today, what I might do is ask those very same questions that I asked my group.
Awesome.
And you and I can kind of discuss a little bit um, our just knee-jerk responses to these questions.
Great.
And I would just invite the listener of this episode possibly to do the same thing, even to the extent that if you want to do a little exercise that'll help you get some clarity around self-care, you might just plan on hitting the pause button after I have asked the question to do some journaling, and then hit play again so you can hear the rest of our conversation about it. I believe there's going to be 5 questions. And the first one is, what happens inside when I mention the words self-care? Now, you and I have been talking about self-care, so we've kind of informed what might happen inside. But in my group, we had just acknowledged self-care is what we want to talk about today. So before we just talk about it, and rather than me lecturing about self-care, let me just ask you, what happens inside when I mention the word self-care? So,
well, it's very interesting because what happened inside me was that an immediate recognition. Well, if it's my self-care is in any way at odds with your self-care or anybody else's, then it's not going to work. Like it's, like if I'm just taking care of me, and you're dying next to me, or, your leg is bleeding, or, you're just miserable, then I'm not totally taking care of myself. So what happened when you asked the question was, right? Because then I've got this miserable person next to me. I can't be happy. So I'm not taking care of myself. I want the people around me to be taken care of if I'm going to feel fully taken care of. So when you ask the question, this sort of energy buoyed up in me and enveloped the whole planet. Self-care.
oh, what a gorgeous answer. Wow. Marty, thank you. That was just really moving. Well, and it really does also reflect what you were saying in the first half of this episode. That if we're self-care, let me summarize what I think I learned and heard from you, was that self-care actually would be an honoring of our true authentic self. And yeah, in your example, how could you possibly think of that as self-care if you're buying yourself a meal and you've got somebody starving next to you? Yeah. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next question, unless there's more that you're inspired to say about this. Because the group that I'm facilitating has its roots and foundations built in the internal family systems model, this is a group of people that have come to me and said yes to my offer, which is to support them in their recovery. And before they are invited into the group, I have a conversation with them just to vet them and make sure that this is the right place for them to be. Many people that are attracted to the internal family systems model really need to be in therapy for a while first, if not on an ongoing basis. Not because there's anything wrong with them or that they're broken, but because that there have been wounds from the past that need to be healed. And that's why they're so attracted to IFS in the first place.
Right.
IFS is a compassionate approach to helping people heal. But there comes a time when there's been enough healing that has taken place where the person can begin to recognize that there's something possible beyond what they've experienced so far in life. In other words, the survival mechanisms that we've employed so as to survive have served us. They've done their jobs. We have survived. But as we heal and our parts begin to relax a little bit, they recognize, I guess I don't have a job. I guess as I'm being healed, I don't need to be critical of my host anymore, the part might say. I don't need to be critical of Bill.
Right.
So if I'm not going to be critical, and that's all I've ever done, what job can I possibly have now? Well, that's when it's time to switch from therapy to coaching. That's when it's time to say that part, boy, do I have a job for you, because I've got a vision. I've got an aspiration. I want to be up to some things beyond survival.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to just get by anymore. I don't want to settle for crumbs anymore. I want to begin to imagine that life could be more than what it has been. And that, I hope, is, often it's that spark comes from that true authentic self that's at our core, our essence, that spark of life can be more. I'm not here to suffer and survive. I am, because of these life circumstances, but maybe it's these life circumstances that have pitted me against them so that I could master and recognize that I have mastered survival. And I certainly know how to suffer and survive while I'm doing it. But wouldn't it be cool if I could also have a little whipped cream on top of that pumpkin pie?
Right.
So
Right.
tomorrow's Thanksgiving. I got to throw that in.
Reminds me of something Leslie says in a workbook that she and I wrote, called Traction. This is not available publicly right now, but you could call me. I'll get it to you. But anyway, the point is, she said, that's that central part that is critical of us. I call it your secret identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's not bad and wrong. We want to integrate as opposed to, separate, but it has limited our fulfillment. It's so that you can get a certain amount of fulfillment, like it drives you to do certain things, to go back to our discussion about being driven from something that's actually from outside, but it feels inside. You're driven, to like make more money or get people's approval, what have you. And that has served us in certain ways. It's not to be denied. Every part has its place and is honored, to be honored and dignified. And when it's not running the show, then there are a lot. You recognize how limited your fulfillment has been. Like there's so much more possible when it doesn't have to go through that part's needs.
Well said. So the second question then is, the first question was what happens inside when I mentioned the word self-care. The second question is, what part showed up when you wrote about self-care?
Really?
And that question is asked because this is a group of people that are learning how to use the IFS model. Now, for the casual listener that's not interested in IFS, you can kind of skip that question. Another way to ask the question for people that really aren't so much interested in parts, but do want to increase self-awareness, would be to ask, how was I influenced? What internal influences did I notice and experience when I considered self-care?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I noticed that I felt kind of critical of the idea of self-care. I noticed that I imagined having a pedicure and a bubble bath and discounted that. I noticed that I feel guilty that because I have a thought that I should practice better self-care. So that would be a very worthwhile pursuit, is to journal about.
If you don't mind, say the question one more time.
What parts showed up when you wrote about self-care is the original question. And now I'm changing that that question to reflect for folks that really aren't so interested in parts, to ask, what did I notice happened inside? What were the distinct influences that I can notice? There's going to be thoughts. There's going to be body sensations. There's going to be maybe impulses. There's going to possibly be emotions. There might even be actions that you take.
You might, for me, a domain of life, a part of my life, if you will, showed up as one where I'm not taking as good care of myself as in others. And it's around my income, frankly. I hate to say this television, but there it is, right? Yeah. That's the part. It's also related to my secret identity, right? That's the part that, I'm in great health. I take really good care of myself in lots of other ways, spiritually practicing and all of that. But the part that's, when you said self-care, that's the part that went, this takes better care of yourself.
Financially, is that what you're talking about? Security and finances. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I also heard, for those that like the idea of parts, I also heard a comparing part. I don't do as well as others is a comparing part. Yeah.
I didn't say that, did I?
Oh, I thought I did. I thought I heard that. So maybe I just plugged that in for myself. I imagine comparing myself to others and then deciding that I'm not doing as well and that I should be doing better. So yeah, I had a comparing part. So the next question seems to be departing from the first questions, the first two, and that is, who do you have unconditional positive regard for? Who do you have unconditional positive regard for?
Wow. Whew. Who do you have unconditional positive regard for?
Isn't that a great phrase? Cheryl Strayed, Tiny Beautiful Things is the book that I really have been hearing. I've heard that before, but she refers to it in a particular story in her book about being like a guidance counselor in a middle school with these girls whose lives are just horrible. And they come into her office and she just holds them in unconditional positive regard.
Huh.
And it just transforms her and them. It's such a beautiful story and a beautiful book. But so that was the inspiration for this question. Who do you have unconditional positive regard for?
I like that answer. Children. I mean, because they're innocent and just curious and in love with life. So it's but I would say my spiritual teacher is the first person I thought of.
Okay, let's go with that one. And if you're answering these questions, you might want to pause and answer for yourself. But when you're back, then you'll hear us continue with this. The next question, which is, now that you've got an individual, pick one of the individuals that you just thought of. Ask this question: what do you want for them? What do you want for these people that you have unconditional positive regard for?
Well, the person that I thought is not wanting anything. Right.
Well, let's not assume that they don't already have what it is that you would want for them. If they had what you want for them, what is it they'd have? Or what experience or what state of being?
Yeah, my gratitude.
You'd want them to feel appreciated by you?
Yeah. But see, that's not something that she needs at all. She knows that she's appreciated. But that is what I would want. It's just
I'm thinking of my wife, my adult children, my grandchildren, and what I want for all of them is joy, peace, the satisfaction of a life well lived. I want all of that. So the next question then is, there's two more questions. I don't know how many I said there were. I think I might have said 5. There's a total of 6. How would you like them to care for themselves? That may not work for your spiritual teacher.
Right. That's sort of a different kind of example.
Can I tell you my answer?
Sure, please.
I would want them to do what they want to do. I would want them to live life unconstrained. I would want them to live as their true authentic self.
Right? Yeah. I think that would be my answer as well to any, no matter who it was.
So in the context of self-care, then, what does that look like? Does that look like any specific actions? I'm going to meditate 10 minutes a day, or I'm going to go for a run 5 days a week. Am I going to make sure I never eat sugar? It's kind of back to the elm tree. The elm tree doesn't probably worry about its diet very much.
Right.
Or exercising, or buying themselves a nice sweater. It's
so you're talking about the self-care for these people that we have unconditional positive regard for, what they should do in terms of.
The next question brings it back home again. So given what you recognize for the people that you hold unconditional positive regard for, and what do you want for them, and how would you want them to care for themselves? Now, what are you realizing about how you currently care for yourself? And what I got out of this exercise was I really take really good care of myself. Somebody asked me here about a month and a half ago, and it might have been even in a podcast episode, maybe with Hans or
Mm.
Ryan or one of them. It seemed like in one of the episodes somebody else brought up self-care, and I'm hearing things like meditation and reading and
Mm.
several things that I do or don't do. But I felt somewhat detached and disconnected from the conversation at that point. So this exercise brought me back to the fact that I am living as my true authentic self the vast majority of the time, and that I'm doing what I want to do, and recognizing that if I'm doing something I am not enjoying as much as other things, it's because I've chosen it, and that I am at choice at any point. All of that is evidence of self-care. It doesn't really point back directly to any particular one practice that I do or don't do or need to do or need not to do.
I think for me, I'm very hard on myself. I don't really accept myself the way I am. That's where I'm not aligned with purpose. That's where I'm not taking care of myself. I'm being hard on myself. I'm being separate from myself. I'm making myself wrong. I should be better or different.
Yeah.
Not accepting. That's where it is for me.
So that inner critic is actually blocking access to self. It would be the way that I would reflect back to someone in IFS. And so maybe we get compassionate and curious about that inner critic and understand, what is it trying to do for you? And does it realize? Maybe ultimately we get to the point where the part's open enough to hear, does it realize that the negative impact it's actually having? Because at one time that strategy made the most sense. Maybe it doesn't make sense anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Last question before we close, which is, if you've gotten insights from this conversation, whether it was in the first half of Marty talking about the concepts and the ideas around self-care, and that self-care is leadership, or by answering or considering these questions that I've been asking, those insights, they're great to have, aren't they? However, if we don't take action to integrate those insights, you might as well just smoke a doobie. It's, you've lost the high. It's gone. So what are the insights that you've gotten? What are you taking away that you didn't bring into listening to this episode? And what are you going to do with those insights? What difference is it going to make in your life? Are you going to talk to somebody? Are you going to, what does that look like? Of course, I don't need to know. You can't answer me, but I do appreciate you listening to this episode. This has been a great conversation, Marty.
And I love that as the send off. Like, what are you going to do about it?
All right. Right. Self-care. What are you going to do about it?
You're right. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty.
That concludes another episode of the Leadership Coaching Podcast. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to fuel your leadership journey. Remember, true leadership is not about you. It's about empowering others. Take your insights to heart and cultivate a mindset that will transform leadership from within your business, organization, or community. Thank you for joining us on this quest to leadership excellence. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes, where we explore leadership as relation. Until next time, remember that you have the power to lead with confidence and compassion from the inside out.